you may or may not know, it's Reconciliation Week here in Lethbridge, and we're trying to provide a week of information that's going to help us along that path. So Angela Grier has been so kind to provide a presentation to us about the work that she does, and we're having some technical difficulties and we can't get Angela on video, but here's a really beautiful picture of her. So that's who's talking to us. So also our elder did phone in sick today. She wasn't feeling well, so we don't actually have a prayer, but we did have a flag raising this morning and a kickoff and some awesome elders prayers there. So I'm sure that will bless this as well and we'll be fine. I'm just going to read Angela's bio and then we're going to turn it over to her. I just want to thank Pam and the city for their support and leadership in this entire week, and especially thank you to Angela and Melanie, both from the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. So, Angela Bayok-Sobansky Comes Over Singing is from the Piikani First Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Angela has been working with Indigenous peoples and communities for over 20 years. Her experience includes, but is not limited to, teaching adult populations, Indigenous research and academia, private practice, First Nations governance and leadership, community programming, and supporting Indigenous populations in the post-secondary environment. Angela is an alumni of the University of Lethbridge with a Master's of Education, specializing in counseling psychology. Angela is the Indigenous Engagement Specialist for Treaty 7 Territory for the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. Thank you very much for joining us, Angela, and I'm looking forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you everybody for joining us, and my apologies for my screen not coming up so I can't see you and engage with you face to face, but I certainly am here in spirit and I've been really looking forward to the time that we're going to spend together today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our office and our work, but I wanted to start by introducing myself and Melanie. Nitaniku Bayok-Sobansky, Nitutua Apotsi Piikani. My late mother was the late Sandra Grier, maiden name Big Bull. So those are the families I come from on my matrilineal side, and then on my father's side, I come from the Grier side, and all sorts of other interesting blood on that side. So that's a little bit about me. As Amanda read out my bio, some of the areas that I've worked in community. I've largely worked in Treaty 7 my whole life. Been working on and off reserve in Piikani, my First Nation, and places like Lethbridge, Calgary, and so forth. So I've been very fortunate to be able to be home in my territory, to work with my community, to serve my community in many ways, more ways than one. I am a proud mother and grandmother. I have a coming up two-year-old granddaughter who'll be 2 in a couple months, and I've got a couple of teenagers still at home, and my 2 older boys are off and running. So I'm pretty grateful for to be able to get to this point in my life and to share with you and to share some of the experiences that I've had. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Melanie Palmer, who is an advocate at the office, and she's going to share a little bit more about what she does, and then I will get back into my role.
Thanks, Angela. Well, as Angela said, actually my name is Melanie Palmer, and I'm an advocate. I'm actually based out of Edmonton. So there's 2 offices of the Advocate's office, and so I'm an advocate in Edmonton, and I cover Edmonton North. So most of my area is pretty much actually Territory 8. I hail from actually Quebec. I'm Métis, and been really actually loving actually working in the advocate's office and advocating for all of our northern children. So yeah, that's just a bit about me.
Thanks, Melanie. So just getting into our presentation, I should have mentioned my title. I work as an Indigenous Engagement Advisor for the South Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. And we're a Calgary-based office, and like Melanie said, she's up in the North Office that holds the bulk of our staff. And there's a smaller staff down here in the South. So I do a lot of work, cover the Treaty 7 territory. We have counterparts who cover Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 who are Indigenous engagement as well. And my role, I'll be covering a lot of that in the presentation, but my role is to engage with community like we're doing here now, and to help in the educational efforts and awareness of our office and rights-based conversation for young people. So we're going to be doing a little bit about some of that today. But before, we are really happy to show some of the work that we've been doing in our office. And we wanted to, since we are in the heart of Blackfoot territory down in Sokohkatoki, that we thought we would show a nice video that was translated into the Blackfoot language on the overview of the OCYA.
And so I'm not sure people are hearing the video. Angela, can you hear me?
Hi, we're not able to have the...
So when you go to share screen,
okay.
And then it'll show like basic and then advanced. You need to click advanced at the top.
Oops. This in the... Sorry, which is it?
So are you in advanced?
I don't know where I'm at.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought we did a test run earlier and it was working, so.
Yeah, you have to do it every time you share your screen.
Oh, I see. Okay. So would it help for you to pull it up on your end, Melanie?
Sure.
Okay.
If you want to stop sharing your screen, and then I can get into...
This is the interesting part of working virtually in community. So we've got a whole bunch of conferences coming up, and you know, a lot of people have been taking training so they could learn these techniques that are always popping up, and that things we need to learn like this. So apologize,
I'm sorry,
folks.
I'm not sure I have that one that
Okay.
you have. So if you go to share screen, and then when you click share screen at the top, you'll see
advanced.
Advanced,
sure.
click
Okay.
advanced.
Yep.
And then at the bottom left, there'll be a tick box to say share computer audio.
Okay, and then we're good?
Yeah, then we're
Okay,
good.
let's try this again. Give me the thumbs up if it works.
Yay,
right on.
Kidakutsina kitsinikohpuaamuksi OCYA. Danist spomokpi. Oki kidakut spomokuau. Espomoiau asitapiks. Kikaiksi puatumukiau. Ajohtukiau. Kenemmokiau. Ikomeitsimiau kistunnon nitapessuppi. Tetsitsu taatsimas nakapotekioak. titsaportisak ki tanistapio I tutamapi. Nistuusta muu tutamemmok ki ikanistiu nistuannein titsihtaan jakanistiu. Mats pomoiau nisissiksi kitaakanistukut pomoahvai. Aukaktimeiksi I teipujoppi kesponkiteiksi. Äst aamustai ikanisteisiu kimatohkootut uutamimmuukeiksau. Matumi tiks kei ikkiutukunahkuksi poissi. Tika piti matakomei tuukeiksau. Ooki takatsepatsaps. Ne tespommuuks tamu teipuji. Nahkuhtuissau. Ihka nää johkiitsiu aamustsi ni tohkujuppist. Käks tämä kotiipui. Kennei ustua vai tajakohtuumia. Mä keki toupihpa sahtuu takaa kidakopukuituupiima. Kidakokutsissi vaikka na ookakitsimau. And LRCY Ekoja pikuan kidakokutsispommuuk. Amoksis OCYA ikäiks pompitajau. Ohkuisksenimiau ihka nouttu tamapii. Aamuksa sitä piiks esavuhkantsispommuajau. Aamustsk avajaki tsipuuttueks. Oki kämukska etsistumiks. Kikome akatapi otitsika tsiksni tsitapi pukeiks. Aunitsinhkatu. Systemic Advocacy. Espommoia kanomia nischist manista spontahpuai. Amoksi OCYA ayakaspommoia asitapi kimuksi se petapiks. Eskanematstukia kähänistä watspommussi. Oki muksi pukeiks ni toi. Kikakavoi aakanista kutspompito. Amoksi OCYA ni ta pukakiau. O kikesukutsista piittuja matapiiksi ahkanista spumpuhpua. Kita kohkuttannista jau kita jaakanihpi. Kita kohtuukiau oki kita ohpinemmukiau. Kita sitä piihpa. Kita pessä ahkanista kuspumuukui. Sahto kamespumpitäniki. Oki kamotuitsikatahki. Maapukau ahkanista spumuahpi. Tämmössä nuutus. Aamuksi espommuuk. Iks puukeiksi sitä piiksi anohk. Tämmöisessukimukset hakitsuuk kita kohkutsi iipuatumuuk. Ikuutu tämä pikäksenisi. Akutsi espomuau ama asetapio. Kenyai.
Thank you. So that video, if everybody, you can hear me okay? Okay. That video, the interesting component about it is when you hear how fast the elder is talking, and Blackfoot is not that fast. It's always something I thought they must have had to push to speed up the recording a little bit. But that was our Shirley Crowshoe from the Piikani Nation who did the narration for that. So we bring in different elders to do things like that, and our goal is to hopefully have all the languages represented throughout Alberta. But since Blackfoot and Cree are, kind of the higher populated languages here in the province, that's where we started out. So you can visit our website and take a look at some of those amazing resources that we have. You can, as you watch the video, it's easy to start to grasp the areas that we work within the Advocate's office. So what I'll do now is I'll start with some information on the office, and then we'll go into the natural advocacy presentation, if that's okay with everyone. So when we are looking at the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate, we want to talk to you about what we do and kind of the areas that we're legislated in the province. Our provincial child and youth advocate is Del Graff. We are a independent office of the legislature, so we're given that independence so we could provide recommendation and oversight to the two ministries that we're largely involved in, which is Children's Services Ministry and the Justice Ministry. So these are the areas in which we have legislative authority to work within. That independence means that we report to a standing committee that is made up of all parties of the government, opposed to a single party. So we're reporting to all of the parties in Alberta. We want to provide the advocacy services when young people want to receive services but have been denied services. That's one of the areas that we've been known for, is some people will ask about when they call into our office, they'll start to ask questions about how they can receive services. Well, we cannot provide services to young people who aren't in those two areas, whether it's justice or children's services, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Some people come to us and share that they've been denied getting help with children's services, or been denied a file, or to be given a file, or under the ministry there of the regions, and so there can be help that we can work for that. So that's an interesting conversation that we'll kind of work through the process of the presentation. I also want to invite everybody to submit their questions. We'll go through them as we can. I know that we'll hopefully have a time to open up the question and answer at the end as well, but we want to make sure that we're answering questions as we move through that are relevant to the portion of the presentation. We've got a bit of time here, so I think it's fair to say we'll try to get to all of those as best we can. So we assist young people in having their rights considered, having their rights heard. We are not decision makers, but we have the authority to elevate interests and rights and matters to be considered within CFA, which is the Child and Youth Family Enhancement Act. So that's where a lot of our work is done. We assist young people if they feel their voice or their viewpoint is not being heard, because they do have the fundamental right to express themselves and their opinions to be brought to the table and considered. And so what we base our rights on in this conversation is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the UN Dec on Human Rights, the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So those are some basic instruments that we work from. There's a whole lot more, and we're going to get to some of those as we move forward. Melanie, did you have anything you wanted to add at this time?
No, you're doing great.
All right. So just let me see if okay. So when we're looking at our vision and our mission and our values, recently we had some changes, a significant organizational change, where a part of that change was reviewing these vision, mission, and value statements that would better reflect our organization and how we advocate for young people. So when we went around as staff and we had some internal discussions, and from the work we've done and the feedback from the community, it came back quite simply that we stand up for young people. And that was we wanted that to be youth friendly. We wanted our mission statements and our value statements and our values to be youth friendly, very relatable, and not, overshadowing anybody else's piece in this conversation. So when we say in our vision, young people in Alberta succeed in their lives and their communities, we really had a lot of conversation about this, and that we respect the communities and we respect the autonomy and jurisdiction of these various communities, whether they're legal communities like a First Nation, or they're a community that identifies together like the Two-Spirit LGBTQTS plus community. So different communities that we wanted to make sure that we were supporting people in those communities in which they wanted to belong in and wanted to come from. So we wanted to keep it very simple, very youth-friendly, and engaging with our young people as much as we could. We have a youth council that we work with in the OCYA, that we're fully engaged in this process, and every process that we go along, they are consulted with. We want to increase our youth engagement, as much as we can, because our office is guided on the voices of young people. Anybody can refer to our office, and we're going to get to more of the intake and those processes in a bit, but it's really the young person who decides the next steps that we go forward, and Melanie's going to talk a little bit more about that. So those are some of our statements, our values. We're rights focused. We value our accountability, that we are all responsible for our own actions and the actions of the OCYA. So we're held to really high standards of accountability within our OCYA community. We have a lot of quality assurance evaluations that are going on continuously, so we could really make sure that we're on top of that piece to ensure that we have respect within our work and the things we do, valuing everybody's feelings, wishes, rights, and traditions, and that we have integrity in all that we say we do, so that we follow through with what we say we're going to do. Those are really important things to us. Melanie, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not at all.
Okay. So just moving on through the organizational structure, it's pretty basic. We have approximately 80 staff members throughout our Edmonton and Calgary offices, with the majority of our staff being in Edmonton. This diagram shows how our office is structured, and we'll talk more detail about that as we kind of go through, but we'll start with the strategic support area, which provides our administrative and business services, finance, HR, those types of things. Our quality assurance and so forth is also a part of that. And within our direct advocacy slide, we're going to, our services, we're going to have a whole slide that we're going to kind of talk about that, as well as the investigations and legal representation. So we'll get to these slides specifically right now. In going through with our direct advocacy service, we had some changes that kind of reconfigure the office, and we get put in different pods that hopefully make things more efficiently for the work that we do, because sometimes it can get very complicated and diverse as we move through some of these conversations. You'll see that we have four parts of this direct advocacy, which is intake services, individual advocacy, which Melanie will speak a lot to, the systemic advocacy, and engagement and education. Within the intake services, this is often the first point of contact for many who call our office and for young people, and so, and as well as other organizations. So we have 4 intake positions currently, and then they continue to work to meet the demands that their team faces, and they are housed in the Edmonton office. And so largely done by phone for weekly regular business hours, typically from 8:15 to 4:30. Youth calls are prioritized, and when there is a young person on intake, immediately there's a notification sent out to staff, you know, kind of getting everyone ready for whatever that young person needs. So it's a really neat process how they do that. We're working to see if we could have more intake outside of those business hours, but at this point, this is where we're at. Anyone, like I had mentioned, our referrals come from many different sources, and anyone can contact us. If you have any questions, we always encourage you to contact us, even if you think it's out of our scope. Our intake staff have a list of resources and services throughout the province. So if you do not fit in scope and your call is not advanced to an advocate, they themselves at intake will have a list of information that can help you in generally the inquiries that you're looking for. So things that are out of our scope, like family law and so forth, they might have a lot of different resources for that. So please, if there's anything that people want to share in your community where you're at right now, and if you have anything you want us to add to our list for people in your area as a helping resource, please let us know. We're always collecting that information and renewing that. So like we had mentioned, anybody can contact us, but it's generally when a young person's rights are not being respected, and that those have to be when a young person is involved in the justice system, whether they are incarcerated at like a Calgary Young Offender Center or the Edmonton Young Offender Center, or from the time of their arrest to their probationary period. They have support with our advocates to support them on that. Did you want to mention anything on the justice side, Melanie? of that in your experience as an advocate?
Yeah, so as Angela is saying, we do receive actually quite a few calls from, young people at either, we call it EYOC or, CYOC, and a lot of that has to do with potentially being in isolation for a long period of time. Not really feeling heard, not being able to contact family, and not having enough food to eat. But we also have to remember that, like, these are growing young people that need a lot of food. So yeah, so we are deemed as a professional visitor. Over there, so we're able to access more like kind of specialized appointments than like your regular, maybe community, like visiting hours.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, Melanie is going to get into more of her work coming up actually right away. So just to look at the advocacy component, young people who feel their rights are not being respected, their interests are not being considered. That's why we have the ages 0 and up, because our advocates have to be able to go out and look at potential issue when they're that small. Melanie, could you give an example of that?
So yeah, sure. So for instance, if we get a phone call from either a foster parent or a caseworker, or a parent or a concerned a member of the community about, for instance, a baby or a toddler who can't really speak, can't really direct me, we would go out and have a visit and talk to people and engage with that child and that baby, and really try and get a sense of what is life like for that child. What is their lived experience? If they were standing there and they were 6 or 8 or 12 or 16, and I was asking them these questions, what would they be likely to say to me? So, and we kind of do that by like watching how they interact with, the world around them, like by watching how they interact like with the adults around them as well. So we feel that every child, no matter any age, can participate.
Yeah, that's the important point, is that at any age, a child can receive an advocate, can have that support, no matter how old they are. Our advocates are trained to be able to go in, like Melanie said, look at the environment, look at their engagement with certain people, and start to kind of build the story with that. So that is an example of kind of the work that with really young ones, because people often ask us, how do you advocate for somebody who's 0, right? A newborn. And so we look at their interests, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll look at the individual advocacy component, and then we'll finish off with the last two. So Melanie is going to speak to this. She's an advocate who works one-on-one with our children and youth to have their voices heard, their rights recognized, their interests considered. And as mentioned, from infancy to young adult is the age range. And we have 11 advocates in Edmonton who cover Red Deer and North, and we have 7 advocates in Calgary who cover Red Deer South, and each have a manager at each site. And our province is actually the only province in Canada that advocates for a face-to-face meeting with young people. A lot of other provinces have just a call-in center, but our advocates actually go out and meet face-to-face with our young people so they could really get to know more. So I'll let Melanie speak to this area.
Okay, so as Angela said, we see every child. In the current pandemic, that's not been possible, but through our normal business, we see every child, and the Convention on actually the Rights of Children and the UN DRIP really underpin everything we do. So in the case of maybe a child who isn't able to speak with me, the Convention on the rights of the child is what guides me. What rights are being met? What rights may be being overlooked? And so in its purest form, our job is to gather as much information as we can and then determine if there is an advocacy issue. So in other words, determine if there are some rights that might be being overlooked, and then seek to influence the people who can actually make a decision to make that change. So in the purest form, that's what advocates do. With older children, we try to support and actually get alongside them to be able to have them speak on their own behalf, and so that they can learn that they have a voice and what they say matters. What we don't do is we don't guarantee that a child will get everything a child actually wants. But what we can guarantee is that they will feel heard. They will have a seat at the table. Yeah, I think, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that Melanie's very modest. They do so much, these
Yeah, we do
advocates.
so
They
much.
do so
Yeah.
much, and
So,
it's such
yeah.
and she's being very
Okay.
modest.
So we do that by, we attend meetings, we help young people send emails or texts or letters. We will attend meetings either with the young person or on behalf of the young person. And for the ones who can speak with us, they're in the driver's seat in the sense that they have a something to say about our plan of action. So although I will advise them on what their rights actually are, because a lot of children don't know that they have rights, and I will advise them. They're a key stakeholder in what we do next. And so sometimes they don't want me to raise. So for instance, I had a little girl who was actually 12, and she had been moved to a place that was quite far away, from her school. And so the foster parent was only taking her to school every other day. I thought, oh, that's a problem. So I asked her if she wanted me to raise that and to try and make it so that she can get to school every day. And of course she was like, no, I'm good. It's fine. So, we had a further conversation about that, but the whole point is that they have a stake in this. This is their plan. This is actually their life. For me to go off and make a plan and do all this stuff that they don't really know about actually defeats the purpose of me being involved. We do everything we can with the young people. Now, there are times when issues are extremely complex and distressing. And there are times when I've said, are you okay with me talking to whoever I need to speak to make things happen? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, just it's too much. It hurts too bad. And that's okay too. But our main goal is to kind of work myself out of a job so that they can feel that they have a voice and that their voice matters. And then we teach them how to go about it in a way where people will actually listen to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part is the evolving capacity for their self-advocacy that comes out of the interactions between the young person and an advocate. It's very a thin line to walk on the objectivity of your role. As I was listening to you talk, thinking about that, having to remain objective and listening to the advocate stories and hearing, some of the things they, what they would want versus what the young person want. They struggle with that, but they make it work. And the young people that have been involved with our advocacy services have always come back to say it was life-changing and it was very supportive. So that's something that's really important to say as well. Was there anything you wanted to add, Melanie, to that, to finish up the individual advocacy component?
Yeah, I think the one thing as well is to know that we focus in on the child, so we don't have to worry about the government bureaucracy in the sense of pleasing the courts or having a court argument or pleasing the parents or pleasing other people or getting a network together, or our focus is that child. And so as a like result, our relationship with like a child looks very different than, say, the relationship between a child and their caseworker. The other thing between our in our like relationship is the information a child tells me is privileged. So I cannot be ordered to like give a witness statement or like testify in court. Obviously, if a child is telling me that they have plans to hurt themselves or others, that is in that needs more conversation, and our like children know that that's when our confidentiality will be breached. But so because of that privilege, like young people are able to have a level of I think actually trust that they may not experience in other relationships with paid professionals around them. And what we can do is, I had a boy once, he was 8, and the plan was for him to go back to a member of his family, but he had lived with that member of his family before, and he didn't have a good experience. And everybody knew the experience he had, but he didn't have a good experience. And he told me, I don't want to go and live with that member again, but don't tell anybody that, because I don't want anybody mad at me. So it's that tricky way of being able to represent his viewpoint without, breaching the privilege. But he was able to put himself in like a level of vulnerability with me that he might not have been able to with another professional. And I think that's what sometimes it happens when some people don't necessarily understand when like young people might tell the advocate something that they haven't told anybody else. And that is because of it. Now, if we're told it's okay, we can share things, we do. But it is a very specific relationship, because our focus is just the young person.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's really amazing to hear. And that's I think what's the life changing is that some of them are encountering someone for the first time who's saying, I'm going to be on your team just for you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really powerful. We've heard that a lot from our young people because usually, you know, there's a lot of challenges. And I always say my ethics prof would have loved this organization. Nothing but ethical dilemmas left and right that our people have to sort through. So I'm just going to jump ahead into our systemic and our last little bubbles on the advocacy services. So in our systemic work that we do, it's really about bringing attention to issues that impact many young people involved in the government system. One of our most recent reports was called Care in Custody, which was on the overuse of pepper spray and the overuse of segregation that young people were experiencing in the justice system. So that was one of, I think that was our first justice report. Other reports that are we've done, one of them is called Voices for Change, which is regarding the overrepresentation of Indigenous young people in care. And that was from 2016. And so we're actually getting ready to revisit that report and then again revisit communities. So I'm going to hopefully see some of you out there and email me. I will have my contact information at the end of the presentation. If there's somebody out there who says, I really want to be a part of that community conversation, I'm relevant to this conversation in this way. So we're going to be looking for that engagement with community probably in the next year as we plan to look at a 5-year review of that particular report. Toward a Better Tomorrow is a report that addressed the challenge of Aboriginal youth suicide. And so that was done in March 2016 as well. Into Focus is a report we did called Calling Attention to Youth Opioid Use in Alberta. And that was released in June 2018. So these are some examples of the reports that we've done. Speaking Out, a special report on LGBTQTS plus young people in child welfare and youth justice systems. These types of reports really speak to some systemic issues that we've saw, whether they're through our quality assurance team, our data, our the review of that data that we collect, and of course engaging with folks like yourself through the community and bringing those voices back into our leadership and sharing them what we know. Our work works to inform public service bodies such as the Alberta College of Physicians and Surgeons, the Ministries of Health and Education, and so forth. So once we do provide recommendations to each ministry, to a government in their area, we also track those recommendations. So on our website, you can find out per, like say out of the 8 recommendations we gave to the government of Alberta for Voices for Change on the overrepresentation of care, we've saw 7 of the 8 that have been fulfilled. And that last one that isn't, you can look and see which one it is and kind of learn about, have your understanding on why you think it hasn't been met. So we do provide that accountability because we're a public service body, and we do provide that feedback for community so they can take a look at our website and see all of these amazing reports and resources to utilize in your organization. Recently, we were told by the Métis Nation of Alberta that they use our statistics for the annual reports. And so we're really happy to be a part of community who are using this information because that's what it's for. And we want to make sure that it's reaching as many people as we can. So that's an example of our systemic work. In education and engagement, this is where my role falls into place. Like I had mentioned, we promote and raise awareness on the rights of young people so we could help build advocacy in the community. And I want to finish this up so we could get to the second half of our report, which really is about that. How do we build advocacy in community? And what does that look like at a natural conversation opposed to our work is very specific. It's very specific in child welfare and justice, and some within the areas of child sexual exploitation, but it is very specific, whereas community advocacy voices can be very broad, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So with education and engagement, like I mentioned, we do presentations to community, caseworkers, delegation training for new social workers, because by law they need to know about our office and promote our office by law. Agency staff, young people, and community in general. So an example would be me connecting, say, with a youth council in the area, or a school, or any of the young people who wanted to connect, or their stakeholders. So somebody like at the Sokokitoki Friendship Center, you know, of maybe those who work with young people, I might go in and present to the staff there so they could have a better understanding of our services, so they can help make those referrals when they're needed. So that's largely of what we do. With Indigenous engagement, we're here to build those strong relationships with our communities, and that capacity so organizations can effectively serve their Indigenous young people in these areas. And we work with our staff internally to support their cultural competency learning in forms of bringing in, we've developed a lecture series, you know, we bring in special speakers, we have special events. I think we're planning, we're just wrapping up our orange shirt, you know, day and presentations, things like that. So bringing awareness to our staff internally so they can also have and continue simultaneously building their capacity, because we know that 50% of our intake and that young people we serve are Indigenous. However, in the province of Alberta, 70% of the kids in care are Indigenous. So we want to make sure we're getting, you know, we're staying at a high number, because if there's 70 kids in care, then we want to be connecting with them to make sure that they have no issues and that their rights are being upheld in wherever they are. A lot of young people are in rural areas, far away from their communities, in foster homes far away, and do not realize their rights. And so our role is to make sure young people know that they have rights, and that community know about these rights, and that you can hold us accountable for that. So I'm just going to get through the next slide as quick as I can. These are two of the larger areas of our work with investigations and LRCY. And the investigations is the unit that reviews the circumstances of when a child has passed away in care or has had serious injury. And so we are mandated, we have to do these mandatory reviews every 6 months, our office does, of anybody who's passed away in care over the year. So we're actively, sadly, we're actively engaged in this. And this is obviously the teachings that come out of their passing. We must be able to review as communities and stakeholders to implement the recommendations of these reviews so that these things never happen again. That, like Melanie says, we hope to work ourselves out of jobs. We all agree on that in this field, because this is nothing, anything but these are very sensitive conversations, and our staff works very hard to ensure the cultural and spiritual safety of these young people that they're reviewing who've passed away. So we have, if a young person passes away, say who is one of the Blackfoot tribes, from one of the tribes, we may not get an elder from that tribe. We might want to get an elder from a different tribe so we can uphold the confidentiality of that young person, because we don't want to expose the family, the young person, any of that. We want to protect their privacy. We're not there for blaming, we're not there for finger pointing, and we're certainly not there for criminal investigative purposes. We're there to review and look at the lessons that we need to learn from there. And so that is really the purpose of these, is to turn this into something as positive as we can in terms of really going out and talking about what those mean, and you know, why did this children, what was their life like? What was the circumstances through their life? And really bringing attention to those things. So once you kind of read some of those reports, you'll start to see more of these conversations. So in 2018, the legislation was changed where we had to make these mandatory reviews, whereas we were kind of doing them differently prior to that. So now they're integrated in our work. And we have a whole investigations team that is part of this. And like I'd mentioned, they work in consulting with elders and community. People like myself might connect with an investigator and say, bring them out to one of our nations, our First Nations, to meet people, or, you know, to get information that they feel they need to know in order to develop this report. So it's a lot of that work of supporting our staff to feel confident and, you know, strong within that Indigenous sector of their work, and bringing the awareness out into our Indigenous communities. So that's a lot of the work that is important for that. With the legal representation for children and youth, which is a whole nother division that we have in our office, is where we appoint lawyers for young people who are subject to a court application under the Child, Youth and Family Enhancement Act, or PSECA, which is the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act. So we do not delve into criminal matters. We don't provide lawyers for criminal cases, but it's largely within those areas and within guardianship issues. And so we have a roster of about 60 plus lawyers throughout the province who have specialized knowledge in child and family law, as well as have to have our own standards internally where they take more legal training in the areas that we work in, Indigenous training, lots of that type of standardization for the lawyers on our end, as well as their other areas of competency they have to meet from the province. So that kind of sums up a lot of the office. Melanie, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. And so this quote, just to summarize this portion of the presentation, was really about giving children a voice, and that Levi was one of the young people who had passed away in our office that we did a report on him in 2017. And this was a quote that we pulled out of the report that really gives this understanding to the work we do. We live in a culture that assumes adults know best. Society generally believes that by virtue of their youth, children lack competence, knowledge, and good judgment. Yet, when they are provided information, the young people, the opportunity and the time, even very young children are able to express their feelings, likes and dislikes, and know what's important to them. So this is something that we really believe in and we really support in the work that we do. And I just wanted to put that there, and we'll keep moving. This is Del Graff, our provincial advocate and one of our young people who was sitting on our youth council, a fine young Blackfoot man, and representing and giving the best advice he can in our office. So we get to work with some really amazing young people. Now, if we jump into the supporting natural advocacy conversation, I just want to jump into a couple of questions to get us thinking. We don't really have to have a conversation. I don't think we have the means to, other than with the chat room, but just to get the conversation to move gears into this next topic. So we're talking about supporting natural advocacy. What we want to accomplish out of this conversation is to give kind of that framework to our audience, to the community, about what might a roadmap look when you're looking to do some advocacy work in the community from whatever perspective it may be. This is not a script that is defined by the OCYA. So basically, this is not an OCYA roadmap, or they don't have copyrights to it, I should say. It's more of things that we've put together with community voices to compile this presentation. And so just to kind of start thinking, we're going to look at what is advocacy, and we're going to look at why is it important to share an understanding of advocacy. And those are kind of the cusps of what we're going to be looking at today. And we wanted you to consider in moving through some of these conversations today, because, you know, our role is really to speak on behalf of young people and for them. I shouldn't say behalf, but alongside them. And as Pamela had mentioned in the posting of the post, this is the largest demographic growing in Canada, young Indigenous people. And so that's not changing. That's been the narrative since I was young and first heard that, you know, decades ago, you know, of hearing about the fastest demographics. So we know that this trend is continuing. We know that these problems aren't going away. We know that our young people are making so many wonderful shifts for our society today, in this very day, in the actions that they're doing, in the advocacy that they're doing. So we are not saying that we need to add anything to that, but we wanted to share, you know, some areas of advocacy for them in the community. So just in reflecting, you know, we want to keep in mind, why do we have to educate young people about their rights? And why do we need them to consider, you know, should we consider their viewpoints and provide advocacy with or on their behalf? So those are kind of some questions to mull over. In the quote, you know, we kind of touched on how society in general can often really see young people as not having a voice. And I guess the majority of our work could be avoided if young people's voices were at the table throughout the process of their decision making, and that their voice was included in a lot of those. So I've done a lot of work in my past as a therapist, as a community programmer, and it is true. We don't often bring young people to the table. So if anything, if we could get that shift, that would be something to walk away today with, is making sure when we're making decisions about anybody that they should be at the table. Just like how we make sure Indigenous people are at the table when we're talking about Indigenous people. So it's in that same respect. So I'm just going to move through these in respect of time. These images here are rights instruments that we've kind of pulled out to just kind of start looking at how they intersect with us. And so we could see at the top left corner, the new bill, Bill C-92, or an act respecting First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families, is the latest federal act that's been announced in this past year in relation to child welfare. This act gives Indigenous people, First nations to develop their own legislation and their laws regarding their young people in care. So that means that each province has had their minimum standards impacted by this in terms of child welfare. So those are examples of how these instruments can come along and really uplift a conversation. We saw a few years back Jordan's Principle really getting a lot of traction, because that was a new instrument that was added into our bag of tools to advocate for young people. And Jordan's Principle is really about First Nation health, children's health, really important topic that everybody should learn about. And they have a great education team. If you contact their office, they will send somebody to your neck of the woods and share more about their information. UNDRIP here in the right upper corner, we're very familiar with UNDRIP. It's been implemented in Canada and slowly being adopted through the provinces. I believe BC is the only one that's adopted it and integrated it fully. I think Alberta was on track for it, and then things changed. So it's interesting how that is working. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The Truth and Reconciliation, we saw the calls to action come in to life in 2015, and we have saw so much change across the country since these mandates were put in. The MMIW National Inquiry Report at the bottom of the screen, bottom right, you know, the calls for action there, people are starting to implement them in their work. I know that with the Justice Circle that I work with here in Calgary, they're really paying attention to those. I think we're going to start really bringing it into our work at the OCYA as a conversation, and so forth. So those are some examples of its influence. Again, the Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, it shows that there is the existence of Aboriginal and treaty rights in Canada, and it's recognized and affirmed. So that's another rights instrument that we're familiar with. This middle one here, that's beige in the middle, this is the Buffalo Treaty. And I put it in to bring it more proximal to some of the conversation that's actually happening for this year of the United Nations recognition of the plants and medicines for this year. I don't think I did the title right, but it's in respect to those areas. And this Buffalo Treaty, which was put together by Dr. Little Bear and his, the ANI initiative, really brings attention to the notion of food sovereignty. So if you were advocating, you might include an article from that if you were building something in relation to the food, the conventions of the rights of the child, and of course Crowfoot here on the bottom left representing Treaty 7. So those are some of the localized Indigenous rights instruments that we've put together. We also have the rights agreements that we work from, and we mentioned earlier in terms of the Convention of the Rights of Children, Indigenous people, persons with disability, the Canadian Charter, and our individual provincial acts, of course. So those are some of those instruments. Melanie, did you have anything to add for those?
No, not at all.
Okay. With the, that was a boo-boo. You weren't supposed to see that. It was a late Friday night edit. The importance of rights. Now, we just wanted to put this diagram here because people are like, yes, rights are nice, but rights are not law. Rights are not bound. They don't bind anybody. Even though I have rights, I get my rights stomped on all the time, right? So it doesn't mean that they are law, but rights absolutely influence everything that we do. And the more things that you advocate for and bring to the forefront, you know, the more it can make it to those frontline policy and practice. So that's really what that's talking about. So we start with a declaration or a charter, it gets adopted, therefore it oversees legislation and regulations, then it's put into policy and procedures, and then of course impacts us at the front line in our practices. Different types of advocacy, self-advocacy, individual, systemic. We kind of talked about those before, so I'm just going to move through those. And I wanted to bring your attention quickly to a video I have that is going to share a little bit more about this topic. So bear with me while I do that. And here we go. And give me a thumbs up if it's playing okay.
So as a social worker, you always see that you're going to the poor neighborhoods, that house on the street of the poor neighborhood that's in a worse condition. And yet when you talk to many social workers or foster parents, we often feel powerless about how we're going to help families when those factors are beyond the ability of the individual to control on their own. So we're going to go through right now 7 free ways you can make a difference in under 2 minutes. You can do it as a person of any age and as an organization, so no excuses. You can take action that will meaningfully help address some of these disadvantages that you're seeing in your practice every single day. And not only can you do it, but you can get youth in care to do it, foster parents to do it, children in your own families to do it, your service clubs, your faith groups, and join us in creating a social movement where The landscape of Canada is only one of possibility and honor for Aboriginal children and not one of disadvantage and risk. So the Caring Society has these 7 free ways to make a difference. And all of these are campaigns, but they're bound by the idea of culturally based equity for children. It's about saying that every child should get an equitable opportunity to succeed and be proud of who he or she is. So here's a list of some of the campaigns. The first one is Jordan's Principle. What a lot of people don't understand is that the federal and provincial governments don't agree on who should pay for services for First Nations children, even when those services are available to all other kids without question. And too often what happens is the 2 levels of government argue, and then the child gets left out of the mix. They fall through the cracks. Jordan's Principle is named of Georgian River Anderson, and what it says is when these disputes arise and the service is available to all other kids, the child gets service from the government at first contact, and they can argue as long as they like about getting reimbursed later. In this way, children come first. The second campaign deals with inequalities in education. Many people are not aware that education laws from the province and territory apply on reserves, but the federal government is supposed to fund it. Shannon's Dream is named in memory of Shannon Kustachin from Attawapiskat First Nation. And she was a child who was one of 45 children in the world to be recognized by the Nobel laureates for her action she's taking to improve the education rights of First Nations children on reserve. What many people don't know is that First Nations students on reserve get about $2,000 to $3,000 less per student per year for education funding. That means less teachers. That means no libraries. It means very little science equipment or learning resources for special needs students. On top of that, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said that the schools on many First Nations communities are in deplorable condition. Some of them are infested with snakes, with mice, with black mold. And in Shannon's case, her school sat atop a contaminated brownfield with over 30,000 gallons of diesel fuel. So Shannon's Dream is really in memory of Shannon Kustachin, who tragically died at the age of 15 years of age last year. But she dedicated her entire life to safe and comfy schools and equitable and culturally based education. There are now thousands of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children, students, teachers, and citizens who are engaging in a process of saying to the government that racial discrimination against children is not a legitimate fiscal restraint measure. And as a country, we've made a decision that every child counts and no one should be left behind. The next campaign is the I Am a Witness campaign. What we have found is that First Nations children are subject to provincial and territorial child welfare laws, but the federal government underfunds severely child welfare services on reserve, and that drives children unnecessarily into foster care, simply because they're denied the services that even non-Aboriginal families receive off reserve. So after 10 years of working with the federal government to address it, even though they were running billions of dollars of surplus or spending billions of dollars to stimulate the economy, they didn't do the right thing for First Nations children. So in partnership with the Assembly of First Nations, the Caring Society in 2007 filed a human rights complaint against the government, alleging that they're racially discriminating against First Nations children by underfunding child welfare services and giving them less benefit under child welfare laws. This case is supported by over 7,000 witnesses. And by being a witness, we're not asking you to take our side. We're asking you to go through the I Am a Witness website, read all of Canada's documents, read our documents, and then make up your own mind if after several years after the apology for residential schools, the Canadian government is doing the right thing for First Nations children. The next one is the Touchstones of Hope program, which says that, when we have culturally based and equitable funding, we need to be able to use it for maximum effect. And the best people to help us understand that are community members themselves. So it engages community members along with child welfare workers, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, in developing a vision for healthy children and then being able to implement that in very practical ways. The final one is Many Hands, One Dream. And Many Hands, One Dream is basically the same as the Touchstones of Hope, except for Aboriginal health. It really guides us in being able to have the ultimate outcomes for Aboriginal children served by the healthcare system in Canada. And in fact, one of the things we're really excited about is in partnership with the Many Hands, One Dream Coalition, there's just been a release of curriculum for pediatricians. And we're hoping to be able to spread that out to healthcare providers so that they, like child welfare workers, have an opportunity to optimize health outcomes for Aboriginal children and young people. The final thing you can do is learn more, not only as a person, but as in your family unit. Engage your children in learning about the rich history of this land that's now known as Canada. You know, Canada is a First Nations word. It means village. And it's just one of the many wonderful legacies left to all of us from Aboriginal people that have made our country good and great. So you can find out all this information on our website free of charge at fnkaringsociety.com.
Angela, I think you're muted. Oh, I don't know what's happened to Angela. Oh, there she is.
Sorry, guys. I really go, you know, this technology is just awful. Okay, getting back, sharing screen. There we go. Okay. Can we see the screen okay? Okay. So going into an advocacy model is really about looking at determining the advocacy issue, collecting information, developing an advocacy plan, implementing the advocacy plan, and evaluating the advocacy plan. And for each one of these steps, it's really important that we are able to really critically analyze the previous, because that really coincides to the next. Melanie, do you have anything to add?
No, not at this point, but that's pretty much what we do. Yep.
Yeah, it is pretty much what we do. So really looking for the ways on each step of whatever your case scenario is. So when we're looking at supporting natural advocacy from a community standpoint, you know, what is the scenario, and really using this model to kind of look at that. And we have step-by-steps for each of them. When we're looking at determining the advocacy issue, what's the decision that you want to challenge? That's a very important component of the process. So it may sound obvious, but you have to kind of pull that out and start dissecting that, looking at the challenging a decision, and to be clear about what that decision is. Why is the decision unfair? If you've had something that, if you're appealing a decision, you know, you really want to get down to that. And this is where we might start to engage some of those rights instruments about, you know, if there was an infringement upon rights at any point, is this a part of determining your advocacy issue? Collecting information in partnership with whomever you're supporting, or if this is the area that you're supporting, you know, really working to understand the problem, considering the perspective, considering others' perspectives, and to get the facts ready, whether they're policy or whatnot, to continue moving ahead. So at this time, you're going to identify key players and decision makers. So who do you need to influence? This is really a component. I think, Melanie, you do really well in this area of conversation.
Yeah, well, it's actually quite strategic, and I found that I could bang on closed doors and shout and scream, but I'm banging on the closed doors of the wrong people, and so, you know, it's really, really important that you're able to, like, identify and hopefully come into relationship with the people that can make those decisions or influence those decisions. So we can, so then in my experience, it's been, a lot of it has been through relationship that actually decisions are turned around. You know, sometimes that happens, like sometimes not. But the key to the relationship is when it kind of goes pear-shaped, and if I find myself on the other side of the table from whoever, that we can work through that still in a constructive way. You know, like the child or the children don't get lost in that. And so a large part of my job when I'm up north is like networking with people, networking like with the nations, like visiting people, seeing people, asking them, what are you, the issues that a nation is facing at any given time. Knowing what's going on, knowing like the pressures and actually the good bits as well. So that's quite key, because unless you're like getting to the people who can like make the decisions, you're going to find yourself getting really tired really fast, and then kind of, well, what's the point?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a real process. And I think that one of the key pieces we always come back to is that relationship piece.
Yeah.
Right? Is, what kind of relation are you in with the organization or the person that you're, I guess, dealing with. And from my experience in advocacy, systemic advocacy, there's a lot we can do by pounding the table in terms of getting our own aggressions out, but pounding the table at other tables doesn't usually work.
No.
It always, coming together and challenging, and I've been in some circles, I've been in some political circles myself, and knowing that, a lot of people will shut down before the conversation starts if there is a certain energy, kind of around, whether it's an aggressive, an angry, hurt energy, what we call the hurt energy, which is totally understandable in many advocacy issues. There's absolutely going to be feelings, but what I've found in the success is how can, cool heads will prevail. That's been the saying that we kind of go by, cool heads. We're emotional creatures by nature, but gathering our facts, getting our documents together, reviewing those, making those relationships, those are really going to solidify you in your advocacy. So just moving along, developing the advocacy plan. So we're looking at deciding on who, what, where, when, how, looking at when to escalate an issue and how to follow the chain of decision making. These are really important components of this. Asking yourself, is all the information on the table to make a good decision? And the information gathering is also a fluid part of advocacy, because it will come and go. It doesn't mean that your information will be found all at once. It may be through the process. So there's some different parts of that, and weighing the pros and cons of each of that will also be very important to that decision maker and for yourself when you're advocating through an issue towards dispute resolution. Melanie, do you want to take over the implementing the advocacy plan?
Yeah, so again, really collaboration with, stakeholders and the people who actually like make those decisions is key. And I find myself always reevaluating things, because things, the plan is fluid. Things can change, and, young people change their minds, or so, or like the players change. But and that's okay. And sometimes if it's a big issue, we take it in small chunks. Okay, well, like, what are the first three things? like what are the first three things that we can do to go one step forward? And then we review it, and then we go like the next,
like baby steps.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's like eating an elephant.
Right.
And sometimes there are things that when a young person calls, they think they have an issue, and they do, but in conversation, they actually have 100 issues.
Right.
And, they might have issues that they don't know about yet, that they don't know that they even had a right to XYZ. And so we try to work smarter and not harder. I try and tell like my guys that it's not a game, but it's about strategy. It's about being able to be the loudest voice, but not necessarily, but by speaking in a soft tone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the words we use and not how loud. Excuse me. So, and we are, and in terms of implementing a plan, you know, the plan is there. Like, you developed it during a time when everyone was calm, you were thinking clearly. When you're in it, it's really easy to kind of get your back up, but stick to the plan, like be methodical, because it was developed during a time when you were able to kind of think things through and be
Mm-hmm.
really clear about your role. It's really easy, especially when you're naturally advocating for a friend or like a member of your family. It's really easy to become involved in another way, but
Mm-hmm.
and even, you know, for us, we see and hear a lot of pain. And
Yeah.
it can sometimes be easy for us to switch into a bit of a mama bear.
Yeah.
um, and so it's important, though, that we keep our advocacy hat on, because
Yeah.
once we flip, then it's so,
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just being mindful of time. We've
yeah,
got about 5 minutes, but
yeah,
that's a good point in terms of watching emotional well-being through
yes,
these processes,
yeah,
because sometimes we can get, and I've done it myself, really angry, really hurt. You know, anger is the secondary emotion. It's really about hurt, what the hurt that we've gone through. And I'm hurt about something and I'm mad and I want it dealt with now, right?
mm-hmm.
And it doesn't usually, you know, sometimes you get your way that way, but that's not all good for everyone involved. And if we're
No,
really working on reconciliation and if we're really working on these areas of good relations, right? Because we always talk about good relations, doing
yeah,
it in good ways, doing it in peaceful ways, being peaceful. These are the constructs of our cultures, you know, especially in Blackfoot. You know, it's all about it's about love,
yeah,
and kindness. So it's about having those compassion within us when we do
mm-hmm.
things and when we receive
Yeah.
things.
So just one other thing, just which I think is important, is that to, like, remember, this is not, it's not my plan. This
Yeah.
is like, yeah. So there are some times when we're going and, like, the young, like, person says, okay, you know what, I'm just done. I don't want to
Hmm.
fight anymore. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
are you sure?
You gotta, it's about being able to
You
let
gotta let
go.
it go. You
Yeah.
gotta let it go,
That,
because
yeah.
if you, like, continue, you're not advocating.
You're not at, you're doing your
You're
own
lobbying. Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
it's really about watching. I think those are some really important pieces, just to try move through.
yeah.
And I've also put this PowerPoint in a Word document. So if you're interested in having this, please email me. I'll have my information. Take a screenshot when we come to it with your phone or whatever. Write down the email, and connect with me so we can give this to you there. And just looking at evaluating, we've kind of talked about the developing of a plan, you know, moving through it, even the emotional component, wanting to make sure that the advocacy plan is to satisfaction with the person that you're advocating for or people, and have new issues developed. When do we stop? Because these things often find a life of their own and can go on forever. So really important to look at that. And looking at, when we're looking at challenging a decision, what are the informal and formal ways within an organization to challenge? Like Melanie had said, you know, there's some really formal policy written ways to do that, or there's informal, and a lot of those informal really work on relationships you might have with certain people in those areas. So those are interesting conversations, and I wish we had more time for that. The formal processes often can come with those strict timelines, legislative requirements, and whatnot. So be informed. Make sure you know what those formal processes are, and know what the informal. And then, of course, any legal advice you can get for those formal processes are important. We had a rights video we wanted to show you, and I don't know if we have time. It's about 10 minutes. It's
No, I don't
amazing
think so.
for after, if anyone's interested in that. But this is our Edmonton and Calgary offices, and these are Amanda, myself, and Melanie. Amanda's not here today, but Amanda did help us with this work, but we also wanted to recognize her because Amanda is my Indigenous counterpart in Treaty 8, but she also works really closely with intake. She'll do a lot of intake, so she's very open for you contacting her directly, and you're not going to get that a lot from staff in our office because they get bombarded with, you know, emails and whatnot. So it's take her up on that. She even provided her work cell, which is great. These are our contact information. We're there to connect with you anytime, and I'm pretty responsive on the emails and phones and so forth, so please reach out. We do want to thank Pamela and Amanda for hosting this amazing session and this week and putting the week together. I've got to work with Amanda, both of these lovely ladies in various areas, and Amanda is a part of the justice circles that we're both involved in, and she really runs a tight ship down there in the south in Lethbridge. So hats off to Amanda for that good work that she does in keeping the community together. You really do it well, Amanda. I can't emphasize that enough. And then, of course, Pamela, the wonderful and talented Pamela Beebe, and I've got to work with her sporadically in different ways too, and she's just a wonderful, intelligent human being too. So I just want to make a shout out to these wonderful women and for having us out here today. I would love to be able to continue this in any form or fashion, and Melanie as well there. I think she had to duck out, but thank you for your time today, everybody, and I really enjoyed myself here today.
Thank you very much, Angela. That was very interesting, and we really appreciate that. I really appreciate how willing Angela is to share and to make that connection between here and Calgary. And there's lots of people that go back and forth and family ties and all that. So it's so good to have those connections. I see we got a question. Oh no, it was a thank you. People are appreciating this. If you need any information that Angela has provided, give an email to Pam or myself, and we'll connect you to Angela directly, or her numbers were there. They have an awesome website, and they're willing to do their presentations anywhere. So again, Angela, thank you for being a part of Reconciliation Week. And I'll just hand over to Pam for final words. And I see you've got an elder there. So.
I know I have an elder who's been listening. This is Elder Calvin Williams from Guinai, and he just wants to say a few words to wrap up, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you so much, Melanie and Amanda. We appreciate it. So I'll let Calvin finish.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to just pass on some words of encouragement to all of you. You're doing good work in creating relationships, positive relationships, and also networking ties. I just wanted to pass on an experience I had working with children. And I was involved with two young men. They were two young boys. They were 9 and 10. And they were involved in a homicide. And I had to try and bring these two young children back into our community. They were apprehensive at first, but one of them kept going back to the reserve, and he started to heal. He started to rehabilitate himself back into the community. And that was just bringing him, you know, to tribal functions and gatherings. And when I look back at that experience, that young man that was being brought back into our community was able to grow in a positive way, and also to establish a relationship later on where he had his own children. And I think that is the toughest thing that a young person can go through. And I think in tribal programming, I think we should include that to try and create as many support as many after school programs for our young people, and even those child in care. Some of them do not know who they are when they come back to the reserve. So having them affiliated with tribal programming off reserve is very key also. That way they'll learn their language and who their history and who they are. And I think when they do come back to the reserve, they'll feel a lot more comfortable. Where I know one young boy was taken off the reserve till he was 18. When he came back, you know, he was identifying himself as Polish, and he was wondering why tribal members were not celebrating that occasion. We had to re-educate him who he was. So I think that's where advocacy can really play a key role. And thank you, and you have a good week.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. I hope everyone joins us tomorrow morning, 10:30.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.